This could have been a Christmas project, but I think it's a good project anytime, father and son, make it for the grandkids, or in my case, making it for myself. The plans for this are put out by RB Guns on YouTube. This is a free set of plans. I'm not sure where this gentleman's located. He refers to A4 paper. A4 is a little bit of an oddball for here in the States. The first 10 pages will work on our standard 8.5 by 11 paper. There's no written instructions as such. He does have a video on YouTube, but it's very well documented into the assembly stages of putting this pistol together. The next 5 pages are templates for cutting out all the different pieces, and there are a lot of pieces to be laminated on this. And then there is this page. The only shortcoming on this is there's no X and Y dimension that you can scale off to make sure that your printer is printing correctly. The only thing you can really scale off is this wood dowel, which is 23 millimeters and 4 millimeters. And that's a pretty small thing to be trying to scale to see if your printer is printing correctly, but that's what it is. I did make one change on this. Instead of using a wood dowel, I used a 5/32 piano wire. And you can chuck up a piece of this in your cordless and run it in and out of the holes to burnish the hole, and these parts will move on this very smoothly. There are quite a few pieces to cut out for this. There are some of these that you could laminate 2 pieces of the 4 millimeter and cut this out at the same time. Instead of cutting out 2 separate ones of these, you can laminate it, cut it out at one time. It has the internal hook for a rubber band, which is for the trigger spring, and a front gun sight, which is also the front rubber band hook for the rubber bands being fired. This pattern here, you would have to cut out 2 separate ones. When you get into your trigger assembly, this piece is best to laminate 2 4 millimeter plies, cut it out, drill the holes. The center part of the trigger assembly can be laminated. These have to remain separate. These can be laminated and cut out at one time, and these 2 would be separate. This can be laminated, cut out at one time, and this piece as well. 1/8 inch plywood is too thin. It's about 3 millimeter. 1/4 inch is too thick. This is about 6 millimeter. I had some scrap 1/4 inch plywood that wasn't going to be good for anything else, and I ran it through the planer until I had 4 millimeter. Stack cutting 4 thicknesses of plywood on the scroll saw, you can do it, but invariably your blade will try to drift on you and you'll end up with some cuts here that are not square. So I tried that, didn't like the results. By laminating just the 2 sections that have the front sight and the rubber band hook, and then gluing on each of the sides and making sure that it's aligned as it should be. And after this is put together, which will look like this, I'll go in with a file and true up some of these areas and use a reciprocating sander to clean up the rest of it before putting these outside pieces on. When I cut this outside plate, I had these 2 pieces taped together and I match drilled these 3 holes. Now that this piece is glued to the frame, we need to make real sure that when we put this on here, these 3 holes are perfectly aligned. So what I did, I took some scrap and I glued it together to where it's the same thickness, put it on the drill press and drilled those 3 holes so I know that they're perpendicular. I'm using 5/32 piano wire on this instead of wood dowels. Then I put that on there, and then I drilled the 3 screw holes that will hold this together. Now I know that these 3 pins are properly spaced, they're perpendicular, and the firing mechanism, the trigger assembly when it goes in here, should work correctly. This is the first one I made using the 4mm ply. This is a big pistol. This is 1.25 inches across here. It may be too big for a lot of younger people's hands. If you can pick up a basketball with one hand, then this will probably fit you just fine. This is like holding a Desert Eagle. You hook a rubber band on the front, put it on this piece, and cock it. And the next one. And you can see this extra width here gives a place for the rubber bands to wrap around that piece of piano wire. And when you pull the trigger, it fires. Works quite well. I went ahead and made another one using 1/8 inch ply, and the difference in that is about 1/4 inch and fits the hand quite well. Now this plywood, I had some scrap 1/8 inch plywood from a friend of mine who has a laser cutter, and I used that. You can't see this once the gun's assembled. One thing I've noticed, and I haven't put a finish on this wood yet, when you pull the trigger, that rubber band hasn't come off of there yet, so this surface needs to be polished, and after you have your finish on there, a little wax. Now finally it came off, but on most of these, when you pull the trigger, you let go of it, then it fires. But once you get that polished and you get a little wax on there, that'll fire like it's supposed to. When you start laminating these different pieces on this, and these are trying to slip and slide around, it's very difficult to keep these in proper alignment. And when you have a flat face like here or here, you can sand to that on your disc sander, and you use this face and this face for alignment as you're assembling this. If you're making one of these out of 1/8 inch plywood, you'd best clamp it to something that you know is flat. Now that the pistol's been finished, I found that my problem earlier is that my rubber bands were old and too weak. I have 8 rubber bands loaded on here now. Each one fires immediately when the trigger's pulled. It's a number 16 rubber band. They say this is 2.5 inches by 1/16. That's what they call a flat folded length. In a diameter, that's about 1.5 inches. Whether you have watched a video before or not, no harm in watching it again. You may have missed something, and it will help support this channel. Thank you for watching. Please tell your friends about my channel. I appreciate it.